Do not rob the world from experiencing you because you have a light. God gave you a light. So if you don't shine it, you are leaving darkness in the world. You're leaving people in the dark.
Hey, Beacon, welcome home to your Bounce Back Blueprint Community podcast, where you are challenged to be, do, and have God's best as you thrive on your journey from setback to success. I'm your Bounce Back guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers, and I'll be guiding you on the journey by sharing tips, tools, and the tea on how I was able to bounce back from escaping death, healing from heartbreak, and finding hope in homelessness. And then I wrote an award-winning book all about it. And shout out to God, ever since I was courageous enough to share my story, my life, and the lives of women around the world have been forever changed. And as a member of the Bounce Back Blueprint community, I'm called to teach you to do the same. So grab your journal and let's build this amazing conversation.
She is a doctor of chiropractic, a mental wellness coach, and mental health advocate. Her story includes her migration to the US at age 13, struggling to find her identity, yet excelling in her education. After completing her doctorate degree, she decided to go on a self-discovery journey, which led her to South America for 3 years. What got her through this time was connecting closer to God, focusing on her self-development, and dance. This is where her new Dance for Mental Health movement started. Dance for Mental Health encourages women who are suffering in silence to find their identity, their voice, and to take back their power. She understands the connection of the mental and physical body and why it should not be looked at separately. Her goal is to inform, educate, and build awareness about mental health, especially in the Black community. She is also the owner of Sign of Strength LLC, a mental health awareness shop. Welcome to the show, Rennes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited that you are here. I cannot wait to dig into this conversation. But before we do, please introduce yourself to the community. I feel that we do that the best ourselves. So tell us, who is Dr. Rennes beyond the bio?
Nice. Awesome. So like you said, I'm Dr. Rennes Toussaint-Keshinro. First and foremost, I am a child of God. I practice chiropractic here in New York. As a mental wellness coach, as you mentioned, I work with women who are struggling in silence to find their identity and to take back their power. And as a mental health advocate, especially in the Black community, my goal is to just to help break the stigma about mental health and why we should invest in our mental health, not only financially, but also with time, right? Besides that, I am a newlywed. I got married about 3 months ago. So that has been, thank you. So that has been pretty exciting. I'm an outdoor person. I love nature. I love traveling. So you understand COVID is like killing me right now.
Yes, I know you are an avid traveler. I see all of your photos on Instagram on from travels of the past, of course,
Yes.
because COVID is trying its best to just ruin everything for us. But you got married in the midst of the pandemic. Let's talk about that very briefly.
Yes, ma'am.
How were you already planning to get married this year, or did you just decide, you know what, let's do this?
No, we had a wedding planned, a destination wedding at that, planned for August. And we were holding on to hope that everything will be fine. But then eventually we had to cancel. And well, we actually pushed back the wedding, the celebration, but we decided that we're not going to wait to start our marriage. So we went ahead and still got married this year.
That's awesome. Good for you. I think that if 2020 hasn't taught us anything, is that in a lot of cases, even in the midst of the pandemic, you need to push through, right?
Yes,
You
absolutely.
gotta at least attempt to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Plans are going to change. You're going to learn how to cope and pivot.
Yes, yes. So that takes us right into where I want to start because I would like to take the listeners on this journey with you.
Mhm.
And at a very early age of 13, you had to kind of pivot when your family migrated to the United States. So tell us a little bit about where you migrated from and how that transition was for you as a preteen girl.
Okay, so I was born in the Caribbean, a Caribbean island called Dominica, not to be confused with Dominican Republic. It's a totally different island.
Okay.
And I grew up in a very small village. My village, the population was only about 200 people max. So very, very small town girl. So growing up there, everybody always talks and dreams about coming to America. So when we got the opportunity to come over, it was so exciting. Like, oh my God, you're going to America. Um, but I love my upbringing. I love my culture, and it's still a huge part of me and everything that I do. But yeah, that's where I grew up. And coming to America at first, it was, like I said, it was exciting, but then it became challenging because our parents never sat down and have the conversation of, okay, we're migrating, like what's the transition is going to be like. As kids, we were expected to just adapt naturally to the changing environment. So it was interesting.
So, at what point did you start to feel that it was more challenging for you, or did you start to struggle with who you were or how you fit into this new way of life here in the United States?
So I would say the first thing that was very challenging for me is, yes, we grew up in a small village, but my mom had her own business. We had our own home. We had a yard. We had freedom, and we went from that to moving into a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in Miami with my dad and his roommate. So that was a huge transition. And then trying to adapt to school. When we started school, I say we because my brother and I have a brother who's 1 year older than I am. So
Okay.
we started middle school at the 8th grade. So that's the end of the middle school at the end of the school year, like in April. So everyone had to click, their friends, their circle. So trying to fit in, I always had the sense of like where I belong, like a sense of belonging, like where do I fit in? A young girl from the Caribbean, I have an accent. I became conscious of my voice. I became very insecure about that. So I went from being like an extrovert, like, this fun life of the party to just, being very reserved and shy. So that definitely started affecting my identity. But I will take you back from growing up in Dominica. I remember even before I was 5, like my family, I guess they saw something in me. Like my family would put me into pageants and competitions and things like that. I skipped the 2nd grade. So I feel like I always had this unspoken expectation of me to like do all these great things. I had the good girl image. I was the youngest of 3 kids. We grew up in a Catholic church. So we had certain ways of like how a little girl is supposed to act and how a little girl is supposed to do certain things. But but behind closed doors, I was being abused sexually and nobody knew, right? So I learned from a very young age to basically live like a secret life. Like I felt like I lived a double life. On the surface, I was doing all these great things, but I have this horrible thing happening to me. At the time, I didn't think it was horrible, honestly. Um, but it was nonetheless, it was a secret that I was holding away from my family and the people that I love. So I always, like I said, I always felt like I lived like this double life. And especially coming to America, at home, I'm a certain way. And at school, I was a certain way. So it was tough.
So, how did you reconcile, or at what point did you reconcile those two identities, the secret life at home and then the life outside of the home? And perhaps there was a third one that was created when you got here trying to find yourself in the midst of being a preteen at school with cliques and all of the things. How did you, or when did you begin to recognize that it was taking a lot out of you to manage all of these personas?
Honestly, maybe not until in my 20s.
So
To
through
me,
high school, you
through
continued.
high school, it was normal for me. I guess that was like my survival mode. Like, oh, I'm supposed to figure it out. What was more important for me is to keep that, oh, she's such a good girl. She's doing well in school. So it was more important for me to keep that image, right? So nothing else matters. As long as everybody see me as being good, I was fine.
So
But
once you got, I'm sorry. So once you
no, go
got
ahead.
to the US, did the abuse did the abuse stop? Because
Oh,
okay, so at
yeah,
least
it
that
stopped.
piece was no longer
No.
part of the. I'm sure the once you realized, like you said, that it was wrong, then you had to deal with that trauma. But as it's at the time when you moved here, you no longer necessarily had to deal with that in the moment.
No, I didn't deal with that in the moment at
Okay.
all. Yeah, thankfully. But the damage was already done and I was still trying to cope through life.
Yes. So what happened in your 20s that caused you to have an epiphany or this shift where you realized this survival mode I've been operating in all of these years is not normal?
I got another thing about me is I threw myself into, like I said, in my education. I excel in the education. So at the time, I was receiving my doctorate degree. And I'm getting to the end of the program. I'm about to start real world, right? I'm getting a doctorate degree. Like that's amazing.
Yes, a huge
everybody's
accomplishment.
everybody's looking at me like, oh my God, you did it. But inside, I wasn't happy. I was so unhappy. I was so depressed. Right before that, well, throughout chiropractic school, I was in horrible, I won't say horrible relationships, but I won't even call it relationships. I would say situationships. And it was like I had 3 bad situations back to back, unfortunate situation back to back, where every time at the end of the relationship, I would get the, man, you're so good, but you're a good person, but dot, dot, dot.
It's not
So
me, it's you. I mean, it's not you, it's me.
it's me, right? So, but they reminded me that being a quote unquote good girl or faking to be a good girl was not good enough, because what I was doing is being good for other people, like doing things for them to validate me. So basically I was people pleasing,
Yeah.
right? So those situations reminded me that I wasn't being good to myself. I
Mhm.
didn't love myself. I didn't pour into myself. So at that time, it's like, I can't continue going on like this. Like, it has to stop.
So you have this epiphany, you make this decision. And so once you make the decision that you're no longer going to go on like this, what do you do?
Well, like I said, I love to travel, right? My ending of my externship from my program, my doctorate program, I went to Ghana. I spent about 3 months in Ghana, working in a chiropractic office there. And when I came back to the US, I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I was like, I don't want to be anywhere. I need to have this experience again. Like I felt being away from my environment, I felt different. And I wanted to continue that experience. So I packed up suitcases and I did ended up in Peru, South America. I applied for a job. Um, 3 weeks later, I packed my bags and was like, I'm out. I'm going.
Wow. So you literally were just like, okay, I'm done being here. Let me just figure out where I'm going to go. How did you
Yeah.
decide on Peru?
At the time, it felt like it was desperation. People didn't know that, but I was applying. When I came back from Ghana, I was like, listen, I'm going to apply wherever. It could be in Australia. I am going, whoever accept me. I had that mindset. I was like, I don't care. I am going. But I really do, looking back, it's like God probably called me there because the experience was so amazing. So Peru was the one who picked up read my CV. I did the interview with them. They loved me. They offered me they were the first person to offer me a job, and I took it.
So you applied for this job, you moved to Peru, and then what?
And then what? I took the contract was for 1 year. I ended up staying there for 2 years.
Wow.
So when I moved there initially, again, just like my transition from Dominica to the US, I was like, oh, yes, this is amazing. I was excited. But then the reality hit me that one, I was alone. One, it's really time to do the work, which I did. Thankfully, I stayed because in the beginning, I almost came back home in the beginning. There were situations where I was just like, I can't do this. But the work is hard, right? Healing is hard.
Yes. You know, and I think it's so interesting. I want you to continue, but I do think it's very interesting how God will completely remove us from our home or normal environment
Yeah.
so that he has us all to ourselves. Not that there was no one else in Peru with you, right? But you didn't know anyone there. It was a place where it was you and God and you, period.
Yes.
And so when that's the case, there is not much else to do besides the work.
Yeah. You got to look and you got to look inside. You got to look internally. Like once the same things keep showing up, at the end of the day, you have to tell yourself, what do I need to do differently? I can't keep going on like this. So being in Peru, that helped me to like stop.
Yeah.
I really look at myself because back home, so many distractions. You have friends, family. If I'm down, I just call my friends like, hey, let's go out. Let's do this, you know? I
So,
didn't know that.
so when you got to Peru and you asked yourself that question, what came up for you?
What question specifically?
When you ask yourself, why does this keep happening? Or,
Mhm.
what am I doing or not doing? What was coming up for you that you had to work through?
My mindset. Um, People pleasing showed up. That was the huge thing. I was hiding how I felt for my entire life, right? Just to one, make other people comfortable, but also so that they could like me, right? I didn't like myself.
Everybody
So
else did it.
I was exactly. Everybody liked me. Everybody was like, "Oh, she's so nice," and I didn't like myself. So that's what showed up. Like you need to start loving yourself. You can't go out looking for love if you don't give it to yourself. You have to give it to yourself. Love only comes from me. So that's what I really learned earlier on in Peru. Love yourself.
And what was that journey like for you to begin to love yourself? Because, and I ask this because I think a lot of people, it's our culture now. It's like self-care, love yourself, self-love. It's so important. But for the person who's been struggling or the person who's been people pleasing or assuming this alternative identity so that people get who they expect, to say, well, you've got to love yourself is it's very big, right? How do
Mm-hmm.
you bring that down to on a day-to-day level, on a week-to-week level, that journey? What does it look like? How did you even start once you had that realization?
That's a good point because I feel like when people talk about self-love, like, oh, it's such a beautiful thing, and it is. But from the journey to self-love, it's a very, very uncomfortable journey,
Mm,
right? Like I said before, I was lying to myself all these years that I started to believe the lies, right? So self-love is really just being truthful, right? You have to tell yourself the truth no matter what. And that is hard. That is extremely hard to be able to look at yourself and just let it all out, like just being just being vulnerable with yourself first.
And then accepting it, right?
And accepting it. So accepting it. Yes. Yes. And a part of it is accepting it, but also not blaming yourself.
That's good.
Because that was something I did even from the sexual abuse. I blamed myself for it. I thought it was my fault. So I had to learn how to accept everything that has happened to me and know that it's not my fault. So, and that is a huge part of self-love.
Yeah, I would have to agree. It's because if you don't accept that it's not your fault, then you can get stuck there,
Yeah.
right? So you have to be willing to forgive yourself,
Mm-hmm.
recognize the decisions that you made that may have impacted your
Yeah.
life, but also forgive yourself so that you can move forward.
Yes, absolutely.
So did you do all of this alone, or did you go to therapy in Peru?
So I started doing, before I went to Peru, I did a little bit of therapy here in the US, but when I was in Peru, I did coaching. I
Okay.
did coaching wasn't, yeah. Hmm.
Wow. And so how long did you coach?
I coached, well, I would say the entire time I was there, but luckily a lot of it was virtually. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So you were in Peru for 2 years, and
Mhm.
what would you say was different about Dr. Rennes when she arrived in Peru versus at the end of that 2 years?
Oh man, where do I start? I felt more of my, well, first of all, I knew who I was. I had a clear understanding of who I was. Like I grew up in the church. I mean, I had a huge gap when I first moved to the US. You know, my dad didn't really take us to church. So, but I always knew who God was. But at the end of that journey, I really came to understand who I am. Like I am a daughter of God. Like he wants the best for me. And it was so hard for me to comprehend that. Like I could have it all because I am a daughter of a king. He will give me everything that I want, you know?
Yes, yes. Let's conflate that. I'm curious what happened with you and or your relationship with God that you were able to comprehend that, because I mean I appreciate you even being transparent and
Mhm,
saying that, because I know that there are people, and I'm doing air quotes, who believe
mhm.
but who haven't fully embraced the truths about what it means to believe, what it means to be a daughter of the Most High. So, what happened that your comprehension of that increased?
Like you said, sometimes he takes you away from our normal environment so we could be alone with him. For the first time, I was able to hear from God. Like for years, it was like you would hear stories of people who said, "Oh my God, you know, God spoke to me." And for years, like, what's wrong with me? God is not speaking to me, right? We expect God to be like, "Hey, daughter, this is what," you know,
Like a voice on the
like
TV.
an actual voice. I never know how to be in tune with myself, right? In tune with the Holy Spirit, listen to my intuition. For the first time, I learned what it meant to meditate. When I meditate, I hear from God. I started paying attention to my dreams. Like was starting to have really vivid dreams, like, oh my God. So that's how I really knew God was real because I took time. Like that was my time to really be with him, be in his presence, and I felt it.
Yes. So creating
Mhm.
that space and that
Yeah.
time. Yeah. And I think, you know, kind of going back to what you said before, a lot of us are in situationships with God, right?
Oh,
Like, it's like, well, we got this thing, but like not all the time, but like sometimes. And when you get into that space where And I believe you said at one point it's desperation. Things start to shift.
Yeah.
So it's at the end of the 2 years. Was it in Peru during that 2 years that you started dancing, or was it after?
Okay, so I did 2 years in Peru, and then I did 1 year in Honduras. That was another experience. But again, I just spoke about dreams. Like I had a vivid dream that God sent me to Honduras, and which yeah. But the dance for mental health, it did started while I was in Peru. But actually, I was dancing because I felt like every morning I play music and I dance and I felt amazing. And I was saying I need to start a dance for health movement. But it wasn't until last year that I connected dance for mental health because it helps us feel good. Like our brains actually releases feel good hormones while we not only dance, but any type of movement, exercise, running. But my exercise of choice is dancing. I do not like to work out. So that's how I connected dance for mental health.
Okay, I want to dig into that, but first I have to go back. How did you go from Peru to Honduras? What was this dream? What was this transition?
So very vivid. I know God, it was okay. Let me see how I'm going to put it. So I dreamt that God says go to this country, and the country Honduras starts with the letter H. So I'm just like, that was a few days prior. And I was kind of in the transition. Okay, is it my time to move on? Let me see where I should go. And a job from Honduras came up.
Okay. Okay.
And when I tell you it was like perfect timing, the doctor, she was about to leave to come back to the US. I spoke to her again over Skype. We had a Skype interview, and she's like, listen, I want you to come to take over my practice. And I was like, okay. In 2 weeks, I was in Honduras.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
The self-discovery, I'm sure, continued in Honduras.
Did it. Man, yes. It did.
So what would you say? And so how long were you in Honduras?
For about a year.
For a year. So what
Mhm.
was the biggest shift for you in that year?
I experienced some really traumatic things there. And I know it sounds crazy because I just said God sent me there. And then some people would think, well, why would God send you somewhere to experience those things? Um, I was living in a house, and the culture over there is to have a maid. So the doctor I took over her practice, she had a maid, and her maid left with her, so she hired one for me. I experienced her almost trying to commit suicide, where we at that time we had a language barrier. Like my Spanish was getting there. I had to experience taking her to a hospital, and the doctor looking at me and said, we can't do anything. She's just going to die. She took some pills, right? And I'm just like hysterically like crying, like, what do you mean? And he was just like, who is this person to you? I was like, she's a human being.
Right.
So that was super traumatic. I experienced betrayal, where I trusted a certain someone, and they literally stole from me and lied to me. And mind you, I'm in a country again where I knew absolutely no one. But on the flip side, I got into a community of other of missionaries, and they are the ones that really poured into me and really helped me experience God in a much deeper way. And had I not gone to Honduras, I don't think I'll ever experience that.
So why did you leave Honduras?
Oh, I was ready to go.
So
Okay,
it's like
God.
the journey was done.
Woo. I
That
left.
of the journey.
Yes. I didn't run away in the middle of craziness that was going on. And a lot of people was like, why are you still here? You need to come home. And I was like, no, when I make a commitment, I like to be true to my word. So I stayed as long as I could. And then I felt like it was my time to come back home and face the music of being back in the US and being around my family. So yeah.
So how was that re-entry? It was almost like migrating to the US again, right? And you were a different Rennes when you got back. Did you go back to Miami? Did your
No,
family?
I ended up moving to New York of all places.
Okay.
So I came from Honduras to New York, yes.
So how was that transition and the transition back into not only life in the US, but life with your family and perhaps with your friends?
I loved it. My relationship with my family got so much better. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but throughout high school and even college, I lashed out a lot. Um, not just being rebellious, but just having that anger towards my family. But once I went through my journey and understanding and not blaming them for the things I've been through, my relationship has been so good with my family. So it was a really great transition.
That's good. That's not
Yeah.
generally the experience. Sometimes
Yeah.
we have some friction with people when we step into our fullness or
Mm-hmm.
walk in our truth. So I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that you are welcomed
Yes.
home with
Yeah.
did you come back to the US and get another job doing chiropractic work?
Yes. So I'm still
So,
practicing as a chiropractor. Yes.
and so how long ago was it that or how long has it been that you're back now in the US from that journey?
It's been actually exactly 3 years. I came back in December of 2017. Yes, so 3 years.
So, over the course of these 3 years, you've become more involved in mental health awareness
Mhm.
and become an advocate. What triggered that?
Oh, after my journey, after what I went through, because for years, I suffered in silence. I really did not know what it was. And once I went through that journey, I was like, man, why don't we talk about this? Like, we need to be more vocal. If I have struggled with that, I know for a fact other people are struggling with it. So I really just wanted, it just started by, oh, I'm just going to talk about mental health here and there. And I feel like God placed it on my heart. That's what I should say. God placed it on my heart because I was like, there's something else I need to be doing. I felt some type of emptiness. And he said, talk about your journey, talk about mental health. So I started by just creating t-shirts. It's like, oh, I'll just create some t-shirts and sell some t-shirts. And that was in 2018. Then last year, a guy was like, that is cute, but you need to do something else. You need to go deeper. So that's why I started coaching women I'm coaching women through the journey.
And then, and I will say that T-shirts are a great conversation
Yeah.
starter,
Yes.
especially if you have the right quote or, one liner on there. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
start a conversation that could take you a lot of places. But I can totally hear God saying, like, that's cute, but yeah, that's not what I said. That's not what I told you. Let's try this again. Yes, I've been
Right.
there. So you start coaching, and this is in addition to your chiropractic work, right?
Yes. Yes.
So what happened last year that you made that connection with the dancing and, the mental and the physical and merged the two?
I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but I knew because like I said from Peru, I was like, man, I need to do this dance thing. And I
Yeah.
carried that over. Like before going to Peru, the only time I would dance, like, well, in my young adult years, was like, hey girl, let's go to the club, let's go to the bar, you know? And just starting to dance, just starting dancing at home I brought that over here when I came back. If I'm feeling down, I'll play some music and I will dance. I was like, man, I really need to do this. I've been saying this for years. Um, did some research. I'm just like, wow, it's right there in plain sight. And in my practice, I see it all the time. There's people who come to me, the neck pain, headaches, back pain, and they don't associate it with their emotional trauma, their mental. I'll ask all the time, are you experiencing higher levels of stress? And right away like, oh no, I'm fine. But I could literally feel it in their body, in their muscle, the tension. I could tell. And sometimes I ask and they will say, how do you know? I was like, I could feel it in your body.
Yes.
The thing is that our body is made for movement, and also our body is made to feel, right? Feeling is like sensation in our body. So putting dance and mental health together, it was just the perfect marriage for me.
Yeah, I definitely recognize your passion for it. And you know, I'm sure it sounds funny, but let's just be honest. When you, in my experience anyway, when you had those times, like you said, when you were going through something and you'd be like, girl, let's just go out, get on the dance floor and letting it all go does help. Like
It
it doesn't
does.
change your life necessarily, but you feel a little bit better
You
when you
do.
are like just releasing it all and
Right.
getting into the vibe. Of course, not the same necessarily intention when you're doing it, but it did
Right.
help.
Like you said, the intention. So now with my dance and mental health program, it's not only dancing, but what is the intention behind it, right? What are the thoughts that you're having? What are the feelings that you want to create? And you could use dance and movement. Like I said, our body is made for movement. We're supposed to move, and using that to create the feeling that you want, create a new thought process, create, like, introduce your mind to something different. So that's a good point, that the intention is different from just like, hey girl, let's go out. And most of the time you're not only dancing, you're drinking as well.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, that's good. So, how did you know that now was the time for you to release your new course, Dance for Mental Health? Like, what was it? I feel like you've done so many big things in
yeah,
2020,
yeah.
with the marriage and then birthing this. So, how did you know now was the time?
So actually, before the pandemic in February, for my 33rd birthday, my Jesus here, I hosted my first live dance for mental health class.
Was
And it
that
was like,
February?
yeah, it was in February. I had the first live class here in New York. And it was like so amazing. I was excited. I was like, yes, I'm going to have another one next month. And the pandemic happened, COVID happened. And going back, I always tell people I'm not a trained dancer. I can't do an 8 count to save my life. I cannot do an 8 count. Don't ask me, but I know how to move. um, so that was around the same time in February. We that's how I met you, through our coaching program with
Right.
Patrice Washington. And then our clarity coach, Datia Jones, she suggested, like, hey, why don't you do it online? There's a lot of people at home. A lot of people are struggling right now. Everybody loves to dance. Do it at home. And then I was kind of resistant, like, I don't know. And, I just had a live class, that was amazing. I don't know about this online thing, but I thankfully, I listened and I started hosting like free dance for mental health classes
Yeah.
online. And it was amazing. I went on for like 2 to 3 months, and I took a little pause and doing other things. You know how that goes. And then this year, well, last month, I decided to go ahead and officially launch the Dance for Mental Health program. So, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the program. Who's it for? What
Mhm.
can someone expect as they move through the program?
Yeah, so the program is for women. Like I said, I love to work with women who's suffering in silence. So just how I struggled, like, who to know who you are, to help them find their identity, let them help them find their voice, taking back their power, meaning just knowing who they are, no people pleasing, standing in the
Yeah.
truth. So the program is included like weekly live dance classes. I'm also teaching a model of how to create results that you want in your life. So there'll be self-study lessons, like pre-recorded assignments, like to do the work. We're not only dancing. I want you to do the work on yourself. Um, and having a community, which
Yeah.
was a huge thing for me. As you know, it was a huge thing for us this year, just having a community of like-minded women, having that support, the encouragement. So yeah, basically that's what the program is about. The goal at the end of the program, that you know how to coach yourself throughout life, that you become more self-confident, like you stand in your power, you stand in your truth, and you just be unapologetic. Oh Lord, look, I messed up that word. Unapologetically you.
Yes.
Be you and your authentic self.
I,
So yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So, for the woman who is right now in the midst of this journey or at the beginning of this journey and she just wants to start somewhere, can you suggest a song or a scripture or even a journaling question that she could begin to coach herself with to just start to get up and get moving and start doing the work?
So I love dancing all types of music in Caribbean. I love African music, but there's nothing better than a good worship song, a praise and worship song. And one of my favorite ones this year was Sinach, Waymaker. Waymaker.
Hear
Don't,
it?
I can't sing.
We're not going to kill the people with our voices, but yes, I know the song.
So that is my jam. As far as a verse, this verse has always been my favorite, still is, and that's Jeremiah 29:11. Um, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and future. And a journal question, this is a good one. Start journaling and ask yourself, what is the story? What is my story? What am I telling myself about myself? Write
Yeah.
it out. Write it out. Once we write certain things out, once we take it from our head and put it on paper, sometimes we read through it and it's like, it doesn't make any sense.
That's right. That's right. That's good. I would add to complement what you have just said. I would say that you meditate on Jeremiah 29:11 and 12 for
Mm-hmm.
context, because that next verse says, and you will seek me and you will find me.
Yeah.
And it's so important to know God's truth, but also to know that you have to be aligned with him to really fully embrace and comprehend it, like you shared.
Yeah.
And that question is so powerful, and so much can come. Like you could journal through that question for months.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And then to extend it, ask yourself why, right? Like, what are you telling yourself and why?
Yeah.
Why are you telling yourself that?
Right. And what you're telling yourself, does it align with what God is saying about you?
Yeah,
Being a
yeah,
daughter of God, does that align? And a lot of times it doesn't.
it doesn't. That's right. And this is work that you can start to do now. Like, it does not require you to go to Peru or Honduras
Oh,
or even leave your bedroom if you
no.
have a journal there, right? Like, you can do the work right where you
Right
are.
now,
And
yes.
of course, if you want to go further, you can get with Rennes for the Dance for Mental Health course. So please tell the community where they can find you in these internet streets,
In the
where
end,
you will definitely be dancing. Let me see.
I will definitely be dancing on my Instagram. I'm most active on my Instagram at Dr. Rennes, is Dr. Rennes. And then you could find the links to my website and
Yeah,
everything
make sure
else that I'm
everything.
doing.
I'll
Hmm.
be sure to link to your t-shirt store, which has
Oh,
some
yes.
really cute shirts, and I'll make sure to link to Dance for Mental Health and, of course, your Instagram page.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank
Thank
you so
you.
much for coming on and sharing your journey. And I want to thank you too for the work that you are doing and the way that
Mhm.
you encourage. You always, when I come past your page on Instagram, I'm always, no matter how I'm feeling, it's like, yes, let me listen to this. Your music is always so upbeat. You always have so much energy. I love it. And so I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to talk. I want to give you the floor and the opportunity to leave our community with any um, favorite quote or words of encouragement that you would like to share.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me again. This is the message I would tell my younger self is don't rob the world from experiencing who you are. We all have a light. And if we don't shine that light or walk in that light, we leave darkness in the world, right? We leave people in darkness. So just be you.
So
Not too.
good. That's so good because I believe the very same thing about light.
Mhm.
And I believe that, especially those of us who have had some experiences that God is calling us to use, that we are beacons of hope,
Mm,
of
yeah.
possibility. And so those words resonate so well with me. And I'm sure the beacons in the community. So, yes, tell them again one more time.
Do not rob the world from experiencing you because you have a light. God gave you a light. So if you don't shine it, you are leaving darkness in the world. You're leaving people in the darkness.
That's a mic drop.
That's-
Thank you so much again, Renee.
Thank you so much for having me. I had fun.
I was so blessed by this conversation with my girl, Dr. Renez, and I pray that you were too. If you were, do me a favor, take a moment and leave a review. When you do, you create an opportunity for another beacon to find this episode and get these gems dropped and the support she needs. And if you need some additional support, if you are ready to go to the next level, and really begin to do the work so that you can shine your light and do and be and have all that God called you to, but you're struggling with where to start or how to come up with a plan, I would love to work with you. You can grab the link in the show notes and schedule your breakthrough session at bit.ly/your bounce back guide, and we can spend some time talking about how I can help you get to your next level. I look forward to talking with you. And of course, I will leave you with this: God is not going to play you, but if you are out here in these streets dimming your light when He would have you shine it, I promise you are playing yourself. Be blessed.